Hey everyone, it's Shala from PS I Love You. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today's video is in coordination with the Scrap and Stamp blog post. I'll have that link in the description box below. Definitely head over there to check that out. Today's video is about acetate and alcohol ink backgrounds. I'm going to play around with that. I haven't had a chance to really play with these inks before, but let's get started. This is my little piece of acetate here in A2 size. I'm going to have my patina here is one of the colors I'll be using, as well as pool. I'll also be using aquamarine, the amethyst, which I think is my favorite color out of all of them, some coral, and the flamingo. I'll also be using the alcohol blending solution to get things moving around. And I'll be using my eco-friendly Starbucks reusable straw here to blow that ink around. So I'm going to start off just by dropping some of these inks along here. And I'm going to speed the process up because it takes a while to do all of this. And I'm literally just dropping colors here and there, just where I think the colors might look good and blend nicely. And then what I'm going to do is, after I've got all the colors added, on this one I use all the colors just to get an idea of what might happen when I do that. And I'll drop them, and then I'm going to add the alcohol blending solution to get things moving around a bit here. So once I get that added, I bring in the straw, I kind of move it around by lifting the paper, and it blends together and makes some beautiful purples and blues. Add in some more of colors that I think might need to be a little stronger. Add more of that alcohol blending solution. Again, just keep adding until I get the look I like. Now, you can't really teach this per se, I think. What you really need to do is just play around with it until you get a background that you like. The next one that I'm going to do here is just the blues and the greens. And again, just the same thing, kind of adding that solution, adding more colors of the different inks that I like, dropping them on, moving it around with that blending solution. Now this one, it just got all blah on me. I keep adding the colors until I think I like it. I also try this little dip method to see if that might create some different looks, and it's not bad. I mean, I play around with it and use my little tweezers there to save my fingers from getting inky. But the one I just set aside there, and on this one I add more inks and blow it around and just really play around with the colors to see what they do and what happens when I try different techniques. This third one here, I try the little, I'll call it the puff method. That's where I drop the ink down and then I just do a puff of air through the straw just to kind of give it that burst or that almost firework look to it. And these two pink colors, they look really similar on screen. There is a bit of a difference in real life though. Again, I like that little puff technique, so I'm going to go ahead and do that again with the blues and greens on this next background. And like I said, just really playing around to figure out how the inks move around on the acetate, how they work together. I clean my hands off there with some hand sanitizer, as you tend to get really messy. I probably should have been wearing gloves with this, but this next background, I'm adding the amethyst and the coral and the flamingo as well, and just really playing around with colors to get different looks. And my favorite technique, obviously, you can tell, is that little puff technique that I'm doing. So setting those aside to dry, and this one I'm just hitting a bit with the heat gun to speed the drying process along. I'm going to be using some Deca foil on some of the spots that are still a bit tacky and wet, and my brayer there. And then when I lay these down, I will pull that deco foil up, and it'll actually leave some of that silver foil behind, and it gives it just a really nice, almost a marble look to it. It's really quite beautiful. So just going along here with some scrap paper and my brayer and laying that down, and I'll slow this down here so that you can get a real good look at it. And when I tilt it in the light, you can see that silver on there. It's just, in real life, it's just absolutely gorgeous. So I like how that one turned out. I'm going to add a little bit more here on the spots that are still a bit damp. The brayer really helps to burnish that down. I'm just using that scrap paper so I don't get my brayer dirty. And you want to be careful because if your hands are wet at all, it's going to reactivate that alcohol ink, so you want to make sure your hands are dry. So set that aside. I'm going to do another one here, just hitting it with my heat gun, and this time I want to use that gold deco foil, and I'll just lay that down, and this time trying not to soak up any of that ink with the scrap paper there, and pull that up. And it was much wetter this time. It was still quite a bit more damp than the other one was, and that'll hold more of the foil down. And as I go along here, I didn't realize I actually have two pieces of that deco foil stuck together, so later on you'll see that it is actually coming off. It doesn't look like it here because the two pieces are stuck together, but it's really hard to see on video, but it is just a beautiful, beautiful result once you're done here. I'll do a close-up and you can see. Here I can tell that I've got two pieces, so I separate those pieces and you get a good look at how much of that foil has actually stuck down on there. So this is just really a lot of playing around to see what different looks you can get. And now I'm just using my fingernail to press this down. And then once I think I have enough foil on there, I'll go ahead and set that aside. It's so pretty. I hope you can see it on there, that all that gold that's adhered down. I'm going to have a lot of fun with that background. So I'll set that aside. Now I want to use the alcohol lift ink, and I'm using my Tim Holtz stamp platform. I love this because it's got a rubber side and a clear side. And I'll be using these rubber cling mounts and this pink background. And this is a Stampers Anonymous. I think it's Beautiful Florals is this set, and I play around with the layout of it a bit. And what I want to do is be able to use this background to lift the alcohol inks to get almost like a custom ink color here. And really just sopping that ink really on that stamp there. And I press down, and then I'll slow this down so that you can see once I re-stamp it down here, it stamps really quite nicely with that detailed stamp. I like how the ink transferred onto this white cardstock. That part I'm happy with. What I'm not happy with is how it lifted the ink on this piece. I think this stamp set was just too detailed, and it didn't have like enough surface area to lift the ink to leave that negative space on here. So I blotted up with my paper towel all that excess alcohol lift ink. So you're going to blot it, and you can see it come up there on that paper towel. I'm just turning it so that I have a clean surface each time that I lift. And then you're going to actually buff. You'll buff up that image, and you should start to see the stamped portion of it where the ink lifted off. Now on this one, it's very, very subtle. I think if I had more of a solid background instead of some of those open spaces there, it'd be more of an image. But I'm going to slow this down so that you can get a look at that image. So on the bottom there, you can kind of see that floral that lifted off of there. But again, it didn't turn out as well as I had liked. It's not as stark in contrast. So I'll have to think about what I want to do with that. I like how that image stamped there, where it transferred onto the white cardstock, but I'll set that aside and I'll figure out what I want to do with that later. So I'm going to actually try this with another background and some more solid stamps. A bigger surface area I think might work a little better. So I'm going to turn the stamp platform around so that I'm using the clear side. That's what I love about this platform, is that it has those two sides, and you can use thicker stamps as well as the cling and the polyurethane stamps. So I'll go ahead and lay these out, and I like the butterfly images. I think it gives it a little whimsical look, and they've got some great surface area. So I'll speed this up as I lay them out how I think I want them to look. Again, then what I'll do is close that lid and then use that alcohol lift ink stamp, and really just get a good amount of ink on those stamps. And then when I fold the lid over, you want to apply a good even pressure to that so that it has time to sop up that ink onto the stamp. Now I should have probably held it even a bit longer maybe, or inked it up a bit more, but you'll see I'll move this to the side, I'll stamp it down, and it does a much better job. It's still not 100% how I liked. I'm not sure if it's because these are newer stamps, I haven't used them before, and sometimes you need to almost kind of have your stamps used to get a better impression, but it's not bad. I like the variation in colors that you get when you do that alcohol lift technique there. So I'll set that aside, and I'm going to clean off my stamp here. And then I'll bring back that acetate piece, and we'll see how that negative image turned out. Now you can do this on U-pull paper as well. I just thought I really wanted to try the look of the acetate, more of a stained glass look. So again, I'm just dabbing up the residue of that alcohol ink that's left behind. And it looks actually quite pretty on the paper towel there. And just really getting a clean side each time you go to dab it up. And then I begin to buff it. And it's when you buff it that you really start to see that image appear. And this one turned out so much better, I think. I really liked how it turned out. You can see the detail of the butterfly. Again, I think because it was a larger surface image. So then how those two came out together. And that's the nice part about these alcohol inks, is you can almost create your own subtle inks there. So now what I'm going to do is create a trifold card. This is standard A2 size cards, and it's scored in half there. And I will just trim off a little bit of each of these two cards. Just really a small amount from the side of each of these two cards. And this is something that you can watch on Jennifer McGuire's channel as well, on how to create these. But just a sliver is all you need off the edge of these two. And then what you do is you flip one over, and then you can adhere them together, and then it'll create that trifold area there. So once I get that all set up, now I'm going to actually bring in my score tape. This is really strong adhesive, and I like to use it when I really want to make sure that these items don't come apart. So I'll just go around the edges here with this score tape. I like to use this tape when I'm making shaker cards, really anything that you want to make sure that does not come apart. And I thought with this trifold card it needed a little extra adhesive to it. So I'll get that put down, and then I'll lift up that release paper there. Just using my craft pick here, it sometimes helps with this release paper to lift it up. And then I can put those two cards together, and because we've taken that little piece off of each one, it should fit together perfectly there. And then fold over nicely. And then I have a light blue piece of cardstock here that I'm going to adhere down. I'm just going to use my regular tape runner for this, nothing too fancy. This I know will hold it down, and I don't think anyone's going to be pulling on this portion of it, so I'm not too worried. And I think this light color blue will really set off that alcohol ink background that we created. And then I found a die cut that I hadn't used, and it's just this tree one. It's got a nice frame to it. You can use another type. Anything with intricate details I think really works out well. I'll use that other one on a next card. So this is one that I used the silver deco foil on, and it's really going to give it a beautiful marbled background look. And how I'm going to adhere this is I'm going to bring in this box that I have for when I use liquid adhesives or sprays, and this E6000, it's a liquid adhesive, and it works really well. So I shake it up, and then I'm going to spray it all over that intricate die there. And then I can lay that over top. I'm going to just use a piece of paper here so I can see where I'm going to get the best look. And then once I have that laid down, I'm actually going to bring in my Tim Holtz platform stamp there just to weight it down. So this usually sticks fairly well. If you need to, you can go back in with some liquid adhesive just to glue down any pieces that don't work. So that after that's had a chance to set up, I remove it from the back there, or from the underneath the platform, and I noticed I had a little bit of alcohol smudging because it does reactivate with some of that liquid adhesive. So I just used my mono eraser, sand eraser there to take off some of that ink transfer that I had. Using my Tim Holtz scissors here, I will trim down the back of that acetate. And you can save those little pieces there if you want for another card. You can always use them for a background piece. And then once I get that all trimmed up, and then I'm going to bring back in some of that score tape. And oh, I just love how that looks. I'm going to bring back my score tape that I used earlier because I find that that really adheres well to acetate, and I'll just run it along the edges, and that'll be hidden behind the frame of that die cut, and that was just cut from some Nina white cardstock. And once I get that around the outside there, I'm going to just peel up a portion of that release paper so that when I go to lay it down, I can make sure I get it straight. I find that if I remove the entire release paper, I have a bigger chance of actually putting it on crooked, so this gives me a little bit more time to make sure I get it exactly where I want it to be and it's centered. Alright, after I've fiddled around with that, I can now go ahead and line that up. And then once I think I've got it where I want it, I then press down. And then I can just pull off the rest of that liner paper on the back there, and it lays exactly where I want it to be. And now I just need to do a sentiment, and so what I do is actually use the alcohol lift technique with one of those scrap pieces of alcohol ink here. I didn't really like how this background turned out. This is the one that I smushed together with the other piece of acetate. So I can actually just use this now to do the alcohol lift technique with a stamp. So I have a nice detailed birthday stamp here, sentiment, and I'm going to just use an acrylic block, and I'll press that down, giving it some time to transfer that ink onto the stamp there. I find if you hold it, you know, for a good 5 to 10 seconds, it works a little bit better. And then I get, carefully lift that up. And I'll set that piece aside, and then now I can go ahead and stamp that sentiment on the inner flap of that trifold card. And then that kind of carries along the colored theme from the front of our card. And it's a very personalized ink color now. So if you create some alcohol ink backgrounds that you're not in love with, this is something you can definitely do with them, is use them for the lift technique. And there you can see it actually worked out really beautifully. It's really detailed, so pretty. And it just carries on that theme from the outside of the card, all the colors there. And that finishes off this birthday card. And then I can write my sentiment on the inside. Alright, so I'm going to set this one aside, and then what I'll do is this piece that we actually lifted the ink from, I'm going to zoom in here a bit, and I'll go ahead and show you how that turned out once we lift that residue of that alcohol lift ink. Just blotting that up. And then I'm going to buff it. Now unfortunately I'm out of frame here, but you'll really see how it whitens up there. And then what I can do is I can actually cut this piece out and use it on a card. And look how well that turned out. That sentiment is really tiny, but it turned out beautifully. So I'll just go ahead and cut that out, and I can use that on another card. Alright, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the inside of that card. This is a close-up of the outside where you see that silver foil, and then the finished product of that trifold card. Moving on, I'm now going to use one of my alcohol ink backgrounds and this really beautiful Hero Arts Peacock Feather stencil, and I'll show you how you can use stencils to lift off ink. So I'm going to line this up how I want it. I thought those colors worked beautifully for peacock feathers. Just using some painter's tape here to hold the stencil down. I have a foam ink blender brush and the alcohol blending ink, and dabbing it in there and really getting the excess ink off of that blending brush before I bring it to the acetate, because if it's too juicy it's going to run underneath your stencil. So dabbing it in and then dabbing it off on some scrap paper there as I go along. And I've really sped this up because this took some time. It's a very detailed stencil and I wanted to really take my time and make sure that I wasn't using too much of that alcohol blending solution. So just dabbing it off and dabbing and doing some circular motions, and like I said, it took some time. But once I get it where I think I've lifted off as much as I can, or I like, I go ahead and lift it off, and then you can see there it's very subtle, but it's still very quite pretty how you can use stencils with alcohol inks as well. I think that would be really nice on Yupo paper as well. And how I clean this stamp now is I literally just use hand sanitizer, and I squirt it onto the stencil and very carefully blot it up with my paper towel here. And again, this took some time as well, but I like to clean off my materials as best as I can so that I don't have any transfer the next time I go to use it. So this again, using my fingers and back and forth with that alcohol hand sanitizer to lift up as much of that color as I can. And then here I have 3 cards that I did with these backgrounds. Now unfortunately I didn't get the 3rd card, but there's a little bit of problems, but here's that silver foil background that we had, and the nice alcohol lift ink sentiment on the trifold card. I really love how this one came together, and I can't wait to give it to my girlfriend for her birthday. It's just so beautiful, and those silver pieces there are gorgeous. The 2nd card here is more of a stained glass look. That is with that stencil, and I just used a square die to cut through both of those pieces of cardstock and giving a space for me to write my sentiment underneath there. And then this one, unfortunately, I didn't catch on film, but I used some gold cardstock and that detailed stencil from earlier, and it looks to me like a Ukrainian Easter egg. And this is the background that had that gold deco foil on it. And I did it like the stencil card there, more of a stained glass, but I made it also a trifold card there. And then we had these pieces here. I didn't use them on a card this time, but I definitely will save them and use them on a card in the future. Again, I really like how it lifted off there, that negative, and I think that'll be a nice card once I figure out what to do with it. And here again is that piece that I can use for sentiment inside another card. It worked out really, really beautifully there. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how you can use alcohol inks and some acetate just to give you some different looks at cards here. Easter's coming up, so I think it would be a great idea. Here's a close-up of that one. I really like how that looked like a Ukrainian or a Pisanki Easter egg there with that background and then the gold foil over top and that oval die cut. And I just used some gold embossing powder there and created a banner and popped it up with some 3M foam tape. Just a happy Easter card. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, guys. I hope that you enjoyed today's quick technique and that you'll follow along on the block. And if you liked today's video, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want to see more, always hit that subscribe button and you won't miss a thing. Thanks so much, guys, and have a great day.